So let's get back to Hebrews. So far, we've gotten through the first three Old Testament references that we have to get through here, verse 5 and 6, and we'll be hopefully moving a little further this week to get to the ones that come after. We talked about Psalm 97, worship him, all you gods, last week, and then how that it's actually angels in the Septuagint, which is the reference that the writer of the book of Hebrews would be memorizing and reading. So that's the explanation for that one, but the tenses are a little different here. And the other reference to that is in Deuteronomy 32, except in the English versions that we have, you're not going to see a reference like the one that the writer of the book of Hebrews is quoting, because it has a much shorter version and it talks about worshiping him, all gods, and not angels. But again, the Septuagint saves us with that one, because you can find in the Septuagint a much longer version of Deuteronomy 32:43 that does say, let all the angels of God strengthen themselves, but actually there are other Septuagint translations that actually reverse the order and put the angels at the beginning, where it says, let all the sons of God worship him, and then move the sons of God down. So in those versions, it's let all the angels of God worship him. One of those is Alexandrinus, is a New Testament collection that is very important to the New Testament, but it's got the entire Bible in it, including the Greek Old Testament, and it does do this, as do several others. So more than likely that means that the writer of the book of Hebrews was pulling it from this, because if you see the two together, they're exactly the same. Whereas the one from Psalms is a little bit different, although it's the same idea. And so in explaining all of that, we took a look at the differences between the versions of the Old Testament that we have. The traditional one that didn't show up until about 1,000 years ago, a little more, the Masoretic text, which is a Hebrew text, but the Septuagint is actually much older than that, because that Greek translation was done 250 years roughly before Jesus. And then we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, which has Hebrew versions that are much older than the Masoretic text, and they have the longer version as well, or at least one of those has a longer version as well. So now we're going to try to move to Hebrews 1, 7, 8, and 9, which all go together in the writer's argument. But first I want to point out that something that's kind of important that needs to be just stated outright. When we've gone through all of this so far, he is the radiance of the glory of God, the exact imprint of his nature. He upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purifications for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high, having become much superior to angels, as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. For to which of the angels did God ever say, you are my son? Today I have begotten you. Or again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. And again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, let all the angels worship him. So he's pointing out in all of these arguments how the son is more important than the angels. But what you have to notice there, which is important, is that in this argument, which is where we're trying to dig in here, this is where the writer of the book of Hebrews is going. Where does Jesus fit into this arrangement of the spiritual beings and the spiritual hierarchy? That what is very important is that he's making the argument this way, Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, goes where? He doesn't start trying to prove that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the Son of God. He's arguing, where does the Son of God, the Messiah, fit? So, what does that mean? Even though he's writing to these Gentiles who are thinking about working their way back to Judaism, to being just Jews, following the Jewish traditions instead of the Christian tradition, he's not arguing you have to believe Jesus is the Messiah and the Son of God. They already do that. Obviously, they already believe and completely accept Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of God. Their whole thing is they just want to put that into the Jewish context and not into the Christian context. So they believe Jesus is Messiah, Son of God. So here's a graphical explanation of what's going on here. The question is for them, and what the writer of the Hebrews is trying to establish, they accept Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of God. Here's what their worldview is going to look like if they go back to Judaism. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses, followed by the kings and the prophets. This is the progression of Judaism. And then Jesus comes after these, and the line keeps going. So Judaism is following this straight line, the progression from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to Moses, to the kings and the prophets, and now to Jesus. Even though Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. Just like the kings in the Old Testament would have been messiahs and sons of God. That's the way their thinking is going. What the writer of the book of Hebrews is trying to do is to change that. Christianity doesn't follow that progression. And if you should remain a Christian because Judaism is taking you in the wrong direction. The coming of Christ, the coming of Jesus changes everything. It goes in a different direction. And if you go back to Judaism, you're going to be going the wrong way. That's the whole purpose of this book. He's not trying to prove who Jesus is in respect to being the Messiah, being the Son of God. They believe that. He's trying to convince them that you can't remain a Jew in the old traditions because Jesus came to change that direction. That helps us follow more of what his arguments are going to be for the next several chapters, more or less the entire book. So verse 7. Of the angels, he says, he makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. So he's back to discussing the angels. The angels are God's winds and his ministers of a flame of fire. Keeping in mind, and it doesn't really impact this, but keeping in mind that that word winds is the same word we use for spirit. So this could be, he makes his angels spirits. There's no way to know which way the author means it because it's the same word either way. And that is a direct quote from Psalm 104. He makes his angels, he makes his messengers winds, his ministers a flame of fire. But this word messengers, Hebrew and Greek, is the same word for angel. So you have to decide, does he mean messenger or does he mean angel? Either way, it's the same word. So it's a direct quote. The writer of the book of Hebrews is making a direct quote from the Old Testament here. The argument comes in verse 8. But of the Son, he says, your throne, O God, is forever, and the scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore God, your God, has appointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. And this one, again, a direct quote. It's a little bit difficult to figure out exactly. There are some little marks in this verse, whether you're reading it in Hebrews or in Psalm. And these little marks make it read differently. And that's these little marks that we call commas. Especially when you get down to verse 7, where it talks about in Psalm 45, therefore God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness. In this case, the way it reads and the way it's being used by the writer of the book of Hebrews is, therefore you as God, your God, meaning you're a God and you have a God. Now, that sounds odd when you think about it, but remember what we've been talking about all along. The kings in not just Israel, but everywhere, were seen as deity in some degree or another. Either they were a son of God, or in that context, if you're a son of God, if you're birthed from God, what does that make you? A God, because it's just like us. We don't give birth to a different kind of animal. What we give birth to is the same thing as we are. So if you're born of God, you are yourself God. And that's just following this same idea. So that's the way that the writer of the book of Hebrews is interpreting this when he puts it in, that the God that I'm talking to has a God. And so it makes this whole idea of anointed. What does that mean? It's the Hebrew word Messiah. Therefore, God, your God, has made you Messiah beyond your companions. And that's the way the writer of the book of Hebrews is using it. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of righteousness is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. It would be easier to understand in the context that the writer of the book of Hebrews is using it if you take this comma out. Because then it reads, therefore God, your God has anointed you. And remember, Hebrew and Greek in this time does not have punctuation. So this is how the writer of the book of Hebrews was using it, regardless of the way it was originally intended, which we're going to take a look at. And I'll just give you the hint going in. This is the way it was written in effect. When you see it in its original context, take that comma out. It's talking about it in the way that we're looking at it from the writer of the book of Hebrews. Now, this says, in essence, as it's being applied to Jesus in the book of Hebrews, that Jesus is what? He's calling Jesus God in that context. This is one of those spots in the New Testament that when they were debating the Trinity, that this was pointed to. He's called God outright in this verse. So what is Psalm 45 doing? Let's read the whole thing and listen to it. Listen to what's going on so you can tell me what this psalm was for. My heart overflows with a pleasing theme. So this is the writer of the psalm speaking here. My heart overflows with a pleasing theme. I address my verses to the King. My tongue is like the pen of a ready scribe. You are the most handsome of the sons of men. Grace is poured upon your lips. Therefore God has blessed you forever. Gird your sword on your thigh, O mighty one, in your splendor and majesty. In your majesty, ride out victoriously for the cause of truth and meekness and righteousness. Let your right hand teach you awesome deeds. What did he hold in his right hand? a sword. His right hand was the one that he went out to war with. And his right hand was teaching him awesome deeds. In other words, conquering. This is about him conquering. Verse 5, your arrows are sharp in the heart of the king's enemies. The peoples fall under you. So he's building up the king. He's showing his majesty and his beauty and his splendor. He's dressed in splendor. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of your kingdom is a scepter of uprightness. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. Your robes are all fragrant with myrrh and aloes and cassia. From ivory palaces, stringed instruments make you glad. Daughters of kings are among your ladies of honor. At your right hand stands the queen in gold of Ophir. And here's where it shifts just a little bit, and we're going to be talking about the queen. Hear, O daughter, and consider and incline your ear. Forget your people and your father's house, and the king will desire your beauty. Since he is your Lord, bow to him. The people of Tyre will seek your favor with gifts, the richest of the people. All glorious is the princess in her chamber, with robes interwoven with gold. In many colored robes she is led to the king, with her virgin companions following behind her. With joy and gladness they are led along as they enter the palace of the king. In place of your fathers shall be your sons. You will make them princes in all the earth. I will cause your name to be remembered in all generations. Therefore, nations will praise you forever and ever. What is this psalm doing? What is this psalm about? This is a marriage psalm. The splendor of the king, how beautiful he is, how wonderful he is. Here comes the bride. And here's a description of the bride. And notice it's telling the bride to forget her past. Her sons will replace her father. She's here now. She's the daughter of the king. She's not from Israel. Why is she not from Israel? Because for a king, marriage was not about love. Marriage was about alliance. If my daughter goes to this nation to live, I'm less likely to send my army to that nation. Right? And vice versa. That was the whole point. It was about forming alliances. And that's what's happening in this chapter is here's a queen for the king, probably one of many. We're thinking Solomon here. That is there to form an alliance, and she needs to put her past behind her and become the queen of Israel. And it's in that context that we see the verse that is being used by the writer of the book of Hebrews about God, your God, has anointed you. So the context is a little different. The purpose of the writing is a little different between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So here we go back around again to how the Old Testament is being used in the New Testament and how these verses had nothing to do with Jesus in the minds of the people who wrote them initially. But now that we're to the New Testament, their meaning gets shifted and applied directly to Jesus. We keep encountering that, and we will continue to as we go through here. So, here is his argument. Of the angels, he says, he makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. But of the Son, he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever, the scepter of uprightness and the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. Contrasting again, the angels are elevated, but the Son of God and God himself is elevated more. He's the one to pay attention to. keeping in mind again what I talked about earlier. We're changing direction here. Jesus is not just another prophet. Jesus is not just another king. He's more than any king that has come before. So from here we go to verse 10. And you, Lord, laid the foundations of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment, like a robe. You will roll them up like a garment. They will have to be changed. But you are the same, and your years have no end. If you apply this to a king, and we'll look at the context of this one next, if you apply this to a king, you could say it's not true. Because a regular king is going to wear out himself. There were no kings in the Old Testament that didn't wear out. So while in Psalms specifically, we're talking about poetry and romance and all of these things where reality is kind of put in the background. The whole point is to build up the king. But if applied literally, the king never dies. The king is forever. The king is always beautiful and everything around him wears out. And that's how it does apply to Jesus in the book of Hebrews. Jesus does not change. Jesus does not wear out. He remains beautiful while everything else fades. So we should, next week, completely finish this chapter and be able to move to the second chapter. Like I said, things are going to speed up now. We're going to be moving a little faster, but the ideas are not going to really change. We're going to be talking about the same thing for a while. The writer of the book of Hebrews, with his initial argument here, is like a dump truck. He pulls up with one load of all the same thing and just pours it on you because he's trying to overwhelm them with his argument and is fairly successful. And we'll run into some nuances as we go through, but the overall argument in the first 6 chapters especially is the same. You can't go to Judaism and expect it to be correct. It's the wrong direction. It's a straight line, and you're supposed to be moving up, not straight. All right, we'll pick it up there next week.